My BF was just teaching my coworker his language. She thought it meant more. She watched from across the break room as her boyfriend Diego patiently explained Spanish pronunciation to her coworker Amber, who kept leaning closer and giggling at everything he said. When Amber placed her hand on Diego's arm and whispered, "Gracias, mi amor," with a sultry smile, Elena felt her stomach drop. Diego immediately corrected her, explaining that phrase was too intimate for casual conversation, but Amber just laughed and said she was a fast learner who wanted to practice everything. Have you ever watched someone completely misread a situation while your partner tried to be helpful, only to realize the person was doing it on purpose? Because what started as innocent language lessons quickly turned into the most awkward workplace drama Elena had ever experienced, and it taught her that some people will twist any kindness into something it was never meant to be. Elena Rodriguez worked as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising agency downtown, and she'd been dating Diego Morales for 8 months. Diego was a freelance graphic designer who sometimes picked Elena up from work, which is how he'd met several of her colleagues during their brief conversations in the lobby. Diego was fluent in both Spanish and English, having grown up in a bilingual household in Texas before moving to their city for college. He was naturally patient and helpful, the kind of person who'd give directions to strangers or help elderly neighbors carry groceries without being asked. Amber Chen had started working at Elena's company 3 months ago as a junior account executive. She was enthusiastic about everything, constantly asking questions and volunteering for extra projects. Elena had initially liked Amber's energy and had offered to help her navigate office politics and client relationships. What Elena didn't realize was that Amber had been watching Diego whenever he came to pick Elena up, and had developed what she claimed was a genuine interest in learning Spanish for her professional development. The agency had several Spanish-speaking clients, so Amber's request to learn the language seemed perfectly reasonable. The trouble started when Amber began approaching Diego during his visits to the office. She'd ask him simple questions about Spanish words and phrases, claiming she wanted to better serve their Latino clients. Diego, being naturally helpful and proud of his cultural heritage, was happy to share basic vocabulary and pronunciation tips. Elena noticed that Amber's interactions with Diego were becoming more frequent and personal. What started as quick questions about business terminology evolved into longer conversations about Mexican culture, family traditions, and Diego's childhood experiences. Amber would laugh loudly at Diego's stories and ask increasingly personal questions about his background. During one particularly uncomfortable encounter, Elena watched Amber ask Diego to teach her how to order food in Spanish. She claimed she wanted to impress a potential client by taking them to an authentic Mexican restaurant. Diego politely explained basic menu vocabulary while Amber took notes on her phone and practiced the pronunciation with exaggerated enthusiasm. Elena tried to dismiss her growing discomfort as jealousy, telling herself that Diego was just being friendly and helpful. She trusted her boyfriend completely and knew he'd never encourage inappropriate behavior from another woman. But Amber's body language and tone suggested she was interpreting Diego's kindness as romantic interest. The situation escalated when Amber started texting Diego directly with language questions instead of asking Elena to pass along messages. She'd send him photos of Spanish words she'd encountered and ask for translations, always including unnecessary personal details about where she'd seen them or why she was curious. Diego showed Elena these messages, expressing confusion about why Amber was contacting him directly when Elena could easily answer basic Spanish questions. He was genuinely puzzled by Amber's behavior and asked Elena if she thought he should stop responding to maintain appropriate boundaries. Elena suggested that Diego redirect Amber's questions back to her or recommend Spanish learning apps instead of providing personal tutoring. But Amber persisted, claiming that Diego's explanations were so much clearer than anything she could find online or learn from Elena. The breaking point came during the company's monthly happy hour at a nearby restaurant. Amber had convinced the group to go to a Mexican place where she could practice her Spanish with a native speaker, obviously referring to Diego who had joined them for dinner. Throughout the meal, Amber monopolized Diego's attention, asking him to translate menu items she could easily read herself and requesting explanations of cultural significance for common dishes. She spoke loudly enough for the entire table to hear, clearly performing her interest in Spanish culture for everyone's benefit. Elena watched in growing frustration as Amber positioned herself between Diego and Elena, effectively cutting Elena out of conversations about Diego's family traditions and childhood experiences. Amber asked personal questions about Diego's parents, siblings, and hometown that felt inappropriate for a casual acquaintance. When the mariachi band started playing, Amber immediately asked Diego to translate the song lyrics and explain their cultural significance. She leaned in close to hear his explanations over the music, placing her hand on his arm and maintaining unnecessary physical contact throughout their conversation. Elena excused herself to the bathroom and took several deep breaths, trying to calm down before returning to the table. When she came back, she found Amber attempting to teach the rest of their co-workers Spanish phrases that Diego had just explained to her, positioning herself as an authority on Mexican culture after a few weeks of casual lessons. Diego looked uncomfortable as Amber incorrectly pronounced several words and provided inaccurate cultural context for traditional celebrations. When he gently corrected her mistakes, Amber laughed and said she loved having such a patient teacher, implying an ongoing instructional relationship that made Elena's skin crawl. The evening ended with Amber asking Diego if he'd be willing to meet her for coffee sometime to discuss Mexican art and literature, claiming she wanted to better understand the cultural background of their Spanish-speaking clients. Diego politely declined, explaining that his schedule was very busy with freelance projects. Elena confronted the situation the next day by speaking directly with Amber about appropriate workplace boundaries. She explained that while she appreciated Amber's interest in Spanish language and culture, the constant personal attention toward Diego was making Elena uncomfortable. Amber's response was a masterclass in manipulation and gaslighting. She claimed Elena was being possessive and culturally insensitive by trying to prevent her from learning about Diego's heritage. She suggested that Elena's jealousy was preventing her from supporting a co-worker's professional development and cultural education. Amber doubled down by claiming that Diego had never expressed any discomfort with her questions and had seemed genuinely happy to share his knowledge. She positioned Elena as the problem in the situation, suggesting that secure partners shouldn't feel threatened by innocent cultural exchange. The confrontation backfired spectacularly when Amber began telling other coworkers that Elena was trying to prevent her from learning Spanish because of jealousy and possessiveness. Amber framed herself as a victim of Elena's insecurity, while positioning Diego as an unwilling participant in Elena's controlling behavior. Elena realized that Amber had been strategically building a narrative about their interactions that painted Elena as the villain and herself as an innocent student being persecuted for wanting to learn. Amber had twisted Diego's helpfulness into evidence of mutual interest while portraying Elena's discomfort as unreasonable jealousy. The office dynamics became increasingly tense as other coworkers began taking sides in what Amber had framed as a conflict between Elena's possessiveness and Amber's right to cultural education. Elena found herself defending her relationship and her character to people who had no business being involved in her personal life. Diego was completely unaware of the office drama until Elena explained how Amber had been characterizing their interactions to other people. He was shocked to learn that his attempts to be helpful and culturally informative were being interpreted as romantic interest or encouragement of inappropriate behavior. Together, Elena and Diego decided to establish clear boundaries that would prevent further misunderstandings. Diego would no longer respond to Amber's text messages and would redirect any language questions back to Elena or suggest professional language learning resources instead. Diego also offered to have a direct conversation with Amber to clarify that he had never intended to encourage personal attention and that all future interactions should be limited to brief, professional exchanges in group settings only. When Diego attempted to have this conversation with Amber, she became defensive and emotional, claiming that she had never misinterpreted their interactions and that Elena had poisoned Diego's mind against her. She accused Elena of being manipulative and controlling, turning Diego against a friend who had only wanted to learn about his culture. Amber's reaction confirmed Elena's suspicions that the language learning had never been about professional development or cultural appreciation. Amber had been using Spanish lessons as an excuse to build personal intimacy with Diego while positioning herself as a victim whenever anyone questioned her behavior. The situation reached a climax during another office gathering when Amber publicly confronted Elena about her controlling behavior in front of their entire team. She claimed that Elena's jealousy was preventing Diego from sharing his culture with others and that Elena's possessiveness was a red flag for abusive behavior. Elena found herself in the impossible position of having to defend her relationship and her character to coworkers who had no context for understanding the months of inappropriate behavior that had led to this confrontation. Amber had successfully framed the narrative in her favor by positioning herself as an innocent victim. Diego arrived at the restaurant partway through Amber's public accusation and immediately understood what was happening. He addressed the entire group, clearly stating that Amber had been making him uncomfortable with personal attention that went far beyond language learning, and that Elena had every right to express concerns about appropriate boundaries. Diego explained that he had never encouraged Amber's behavior and had been trying to be polite while redirecting her attention toward appropriate resources for language learning. He made it clear that Amber had misinterpreted his helpfulness as personal interest and had persisted despite his attempts to establish boundaries. The public clarification from Diego shifted the office dynamics immediately. Coworkers who had been sympathetic to Amber's claims of persecution began recognizing the pattern of behavior that Elena had been describing. Amber's version of events fell apart when the supposed object of her innocent cultural interest contradicted her narrative. Amber became increasingly isolated at work as people realized she had been manipulating the situation to justify inappropriate behavior toward a coworker's boyfriend. Her claims of victimhood lost credibility when it became clear that she had been the one crossing boundaries while painting Elena as the aggressor. The drama began affecting Amber's professional performance as she became increasingly focused on defending her version of events rather than doing her job effectively. She made mistakes on client accounts and missed deadlines while spending time crafting responses to office gossip about her behavior. Elena's supervisor eventually called her in for a conversation about the workplace drama, not to discipline her, but to understand the situation and ensure that the office environment remained professional and comfortable for everyone involved. Elena provided a detailed timeline of Amber's behavior, including screenshots of the inappropriate text messages to Diego and examples of how Amber had been misrepresenting their interactions to other coworkers. The evidence clearly showed a pattern of boundary-crossing behavior that had escalated over time. The supervisor thanked Elena for bringing the situation to her attention and assured her that steps would be taken to address the workplace harassment and ensure that personal conflicts didn't continue affecting the professional environment. Amber received a formal warning about maintaining appropriate boundaries with coworkers' personal relationships and was required to attend a workshop on workplace professionalism. She was also instructed to cease all personal contact with Diego and to redirect any future language learning questions through appropriate professional channels. The formal intervention effectively ended Amber's campaign to insert herself into Elena and Diego's relationship. Without the cover of language learning, her behavior was clearly inappropriate, and she could no longer hide behind claims of cultural education or professional development. Amber's attitude toward Elena became openly hostile after the formal warning, but she was careful to keep her antagonism subtle enough to avoid further disciplinary action. She would make snide comments about possessive girlfriends during team meetings and roll her eyes whenever Elena spoke during group discussions. Elena decided that the best approach was to maintain strict professionalism with Amber while documenting any continued inappropriate behavior. She focused on doing excellent work and maintaining positive relationships with other coworkers while avoiding unnecessary interactions with Amber. The experience taught Elena valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation tactics and the importance of addressing boundary violations early before they escalate into larger conflicts. She learned that some people will exploit any kindness or cultural sharing as an opportunity to create inappropriate intimacy. Diego felt guilty about his role in the situation, even though he had never encouraged Amber's behavior or reciprocated her interest. He realized that his natural helpfulness and cultural pride had been weaponized by someone with ulterior motives, and he became more cautious about casual interactions with people outside their social circle. The incident also strengthened Elena and Diego's relationship by forcing them to communicate clearly about boundaries, trust, and how to handle external threats to their partnership. They developed strategies for recognizing and addressing similar situations in the future. 6 months later, Amber left the company for a position at another agency, claiming she wanted new challenges and opportunities for professional growth. Her departure was met with relief by most of her former coworkers, who had grown tired of the ongoing drama and tension she created in the office. Elena learned through the industry grapevine that Amber had developed a similar pattern of behavior at her new job, becoming inappropriately interested in a married co-worker's husband and using cultural differences as an excuse to build personal intimacy. The pattern suggested that Amber's behavior with Diego hadn't been an isolated incident of misreading signals, but rather a deliberate strategy she used to insert herself into other people's relationships while maintaining plausible deniability about her true intentions. Looking back on the experience, Elena realized that the red flags had been present from the beginning, but she had given Amber the benefit of the doubt for too long. Amber's excessive interest in Diego's personal life, her attempts to create private communication channels, and her immediate defensiveness when confronted had all been warning signs. Elena shared her experience with other women in her professional network, helping them recognize similar manipulation tactics in their own workplaces. She learned that workplace boundary violations involving partners were more common than she had realized, and that many women had experienced similar situations. The story became a cautionary tale about the importance of trusting instincts when someone's behavior feels inappropriate, even if they provide seemingly reasonable explanations for their actions. Elena learned that genuine interest in language or culture doesn't require constant personal attention to the teacher or attempts to exclude their romantic partner. Diego began volunteering with a local community center that offered formal Spanish language classes, channeling his desire to share his cultural knowledge through appropriate educational channels where boundaries were clearly established and maintained. The experience ultimately made Elena more confident in her ability to recognize and address manipulation in both professional and personal settings. She learned that protecting her relationship didn't make her possessive or controlling, but rather showed healthy boundary setting and self-advocacy. Years later, Elena and Diego would sometimes laugh about the absurdity of Amber's behavior, but they also acknowledged how stressful and damaging the situation had been at the time. The incident had taught them both valuable lessons about communication, trust, and the importance of addressing problems before they escalate. Elena's advice to other women dealing with similar situations was simple: trust your instincts, document inappropriate behavior, communicate clearly with your partner, and don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting your relationship from people who refuse to respect boundaries. The experience also highlighted the importance of workplace policies that address harassment involving employees' personal relationships, as traditional harassment training often focuses on direct workplace interactions rather than boundary violations that extend into personal life. Elena became an advocate for comprehensive workplace harassment policies that included protections against colleagues who targeted employees' romantic partners or family members as a way of creating hostile work environments indirectly. The incident with Amber ultimately strengthened Elena's professional reputation as someone who could handle difficult situations with grace and professionalism while standing up for herself and her relationships. Her colleagues respected how she had navigated the complex dynamics without resorting to unprofessional behavior herself. Diego's experience taught him about the unintended consequences of trying to be helpful to everyone, and he learned to be more selective about when and how he shared personal information with casual acquaintances, especially in professional settings where his girlfriend might face consequences. The couple's relationship emerged stronger from the ordeal, with improved communication skills and a clearer understanding of how to present a united front when dealing with external threats to their partnership. They had successfully navigated their first major relationship challenge together. Looking back, Elena realized that Amber's behavior had actually revealed important information about Diego's character and values. His immediate discomfort with the inappropriate attention, his transparency about the messages he received, and his willingness to establish clear boundaries had all demonstrated his commitment to their relationship. The incident became a foundational experience that prepared Elena and Diego for other challenges they would face as a couple, giving them confidence in their ability to communicate effectively and support each other through difficult situations involving other people. Elena's story served as a reminder that not every workplace conflict is about work performance or professional disagreements. Sometimes personal boundary violations disguised as innocent interests can create the most complex and challenging workplace dynamics of all.